The early history of the US Navy closely resembled a particularly extreme roller coaster. Almost from the start, various politicians had, for a variety of reasons, tried to minimise or completely eliminate the Navy, arguing either that the lack of a fleet saved money, or that having armed ships capable of sailing more than a few miles from the coast was somehow un-American. Only in times of national crisis and war did Congress realise that this was a little bit of a foolish idea given the world they lived in, especially when the crisis had been brought on precisely by the lack of a navy, and various other powers, ranging from global superpowers right the way down to organised pirate groups, had taken advantage of this. Apparently, though, one of the requirements to be a congressman, at least back then, was to be at least part goldfish. Since shortly after the crisis or war had passed, the US Navy was then viciously cut back once again, and the cycle would repeat itself. One of those cycles was the US Civil War. By the end of the 1860s, the fleet had been cut by over 90%. With almost no new ships being built, it was practically impossible to introduce new technologies, or for shipyards and industry to keep up with the latest development overseas, simply because there wasn't a demand for it at home. On top of that, with the fleet reduced to a numerical point slightly below that which it had possessed before the Civil War broke out, but also with a large portion of the current fleet made up of relatively small and therefore low crew monitors, the remaining officer cadre who wished to make their career in the Navy was massively greater than the numbers that were actually needed to keep the fleet at sea. Many a lieutenant faced the prospect of achieving grey or no hair before a promotion. In this atmosphere, a small group of officers of all ranks decided to find an outlet for their accumulated knowledge and recommendations that didn't involve directly or indirectly insulting somebody further up the chain of command by sending an in-service memo, or by having said memo carefully filed in somebody's fireplace for the crime of contradicting whatever belief it was that the superior officer held. And so, in October 1873, the United States Naval Institute was formed, an organisation where anyone of any rank, and from 1884 selected outside experts, might put forward their ideas or experience in a format that was completely outside the chain of command and thus largely, in theory, free of any immediate repercussions. Even articles that weren't acted upon directly could provide a springboard for further discussion and innovation, or bring the author to the attention of a senior officer who might appreciate an innovative mind on his staff. A reflection on something that was currently new might also be beneficial because it didn't necessarily need to be acted upon specifically, since the object or technique already existed, but it could bring it to wider attention and thus have its use taken up by more officers in the Navy. The implementation of the US Naval Institute also addressed a specific issue in the US Navy. With the fleet so heavily reduced and the country so large, and the short telegram the only means of vaguely rapid communication between distant ports, the fleet had rapidly lost any real central cohesion beyond the most basic requirements of having an admiralty, paying the crews, and getting supplies, and sometimes even those latter two were a bit of a mysterious dark art. The 9 shore establishments and the few dozen ships were stuck operating in pretty much semi-autonomous bubbles. Dramatic developments in various technologies or tactics might occur in, say, Boston, but the fleet elements that were based down in Virginia at the rebuilding yard, now known as Norfolk, might not hear about these for weeks, months, or until a ship that was based at Boston showed up at Norfolk and the subject just happened to be mentioned in casual conversation. The new US Navy Institute offered at least one way of the latest thoughts, ideas, and developments in technology being written about at length and then being published in a manner that anyone who cared to know about them could read about, regardless of the writer or reader being on different ships or based multiple time zones away. On this basis, the first edition of The Papers and Proceedings of the United States Naval Institute, later thankfully reduced to entitled to US Naval Institute Proceedings, was published in 1874 and covered a wide range of subjects which included, but were not limited to, A consideration of how the British and French fleets' manning and training had compared in the Crimean War, what changes the Royal Navy and the British Merchant Marine had instituted as a result, and how adopting similar reforms might help the US Navy. An account of the voyage of the Tigris, a ship that had gone out to rescue the stranded crew of the Polaris, which had gone out to explore the Arctic and gotten a little bit stuck. A tabulation of the various capabilities of compound steam engines in US Navy and merchant service, and a comparison of their efficiency. Proposals on improving the marine compass then in use by the Navy for navigation. Proposals on the suitability of building a transoceanic canal between the Atlantic and the Pacific in Panama. Notes on determining the center of gravity on a warship, which was fairly useful if you didn't want to end up upside down. An account of the Battle of Hampton Roads between the USS Monitor and CSS Virginia, which was ably assisted by the fact that John Warden, who had commanded USS Monitor that day, was also a founding member of USNI and was thus available for interview by the writer of the article. There was also a discussion on the historic, current, and proposed schemes for determining how many guns you should put aboard a warship, and a discussion on the strengths, weaknesses, and overall results of recent fleet exercises that had been held off the Florida coast, and how the lessons from this might impact future exercises or conflicts. Things developed rather quickly from there. Over the course of the 1870s, proceedings went from semi-annual to annual to biannual to quarterly, with the 1879 editions carrying an ever-broadening range of topics, including discussions on exactly how gunpowder burned, torpedoes, the development of armour on ships, a mildly worrying or potentially rather exciting number of articles on the production and efficacy of a wide range of more recently developed explosives, and an essay competition on how to improve naval education, which included a winning submission by one Commander A. T. Mahan. I wonder if he would ever write anything else. At the time of its founding, the only establishment of naval learning in the US was Annapolis. Other places, such as the US Navy War College, had yet to be founded, and so the US Naval Institute based itself at Annapolis, where it remains to this day. Proceedings would move to being a bi-monthly publication in 1914, and then a monthly publication in 1917, which is how it's published today. For most of its history, Proceedings would carry a mixture of current and historical articles, until in 1987 the Naval History magazine was established, which allowed the current and future-looking articles relevant to the existing Navy to remain centralized in Proceedings, while those who wished to research purely into the past had a whole separate magazine of articles specifically for them. Other changes continued in the late 19th century. During the 1880s and early 1890s, Proceedings was occasionally considerably larger than its normal size. This occurred when somebody sent in a manuscript that was so long it was really a book, but the editors thought that the entire thing was probably worth publishing anyway, despite the magazine format. In 1898, however, it was decided to separate this aspect out into its own section, and thus the US Naval Institute Press was born, with its first publication being an account of the exploits of the gunboat USS Gloucester in the Spanish-American War. In 1902, it published the first of many editions of the Blue Jackets Manual, which anyone who's ever served in the US Navy will be very familiar with, and since then, it's published a great many historical reference works, as well as textbooks and manuals. But what better way is there to see where things have managed to go in the past 150 years than to visit the US Navy Institute itself at its home in Annapolis, talk to some of its staff, and have a look through some of its facilities? Well, luckily for you, I've managed to do just that. And here is where the US Naval Institute and US Naval Institute Press live these days. This building is known as Beach Hall and sits within the grounds of the US Navy Academy at Annapolis, so you can't just wander up randomly to say hello, unless of course you happen to be a student at Annapolis. But if you want to do some research or similar in the archives, then you can of course call or email ahead and arrange an appointment. And just to the rear of Beach Hall is here, the Jack C. Taylor Conference Center. And this is where most USNI events are held. So If there's a lecture going on, or an author presentation, or a panel discussion, like the one that I chaired relatively recently, this is where it will be held. It was named for Jack Crawford Taylor, who was a US Navy aviator in World War II, flying from USS Essex and USS Enterprise aboard an F-6F Hellcat. But some of you in the States might recognize the name more from what he did after the war, because in the late 1950s he founded Enterprise Rent-A-Car. No prizes for guessing what he named his company after. And his family donated much of the money which went into building the conference centre, which is a very nice place. And as we continue to pan over past Beach Hall, you can see there on the right a rather extensive graveyard that sits between this area and the main Naval Academy over there just on the horizon. And that, of course, is where a great number of luminaries of the US Navy are buried. So if you want to go and pay your respects to various US Navy luminaries like Admiral King, Admiral Arleigh Burke, Rear Admiral Lucky Flucky of submarine fame in World War II, well, they're all there. And this is the interior of the Jack C. Taylor Conference Centre. Again, if you either watched the live stream about Leyte Golf at 80 or you were there in person, you'll already know what this looks like, but it's a rather snazzy little auditorium, pretty good acoustics and audio setup, and of course it can be secured for private briefings as well as public events. Back out in the hallway we can find a whole array of Proceedings titles. Now, of course, you can actually access the full archive Proceedings all the way from that first issue in 1874 all the way to the modern day on the USNI website if you happen to be a member, and there is a limited accessible option even if you're not a member. I think it's something like 5 articles per month. So you can, for example, look up the 1910 article that the future Admiral Lee wrote about the safe use of revolvers, which is quite interesting. But before we proceed any further into the depths of the building, how about we talk to somebody who works there?
Right, so we've had a look around the grounds of USNI, the building, etc. And that's one half of things, but as you know, a great many museums will tell you, the story of the people is also important. So here we have a USNI people.
Yes, USNI people, yes. Sure, we'll go with that.
Yeah. So for those who might not know, could you introduce yourself to let everyone know who you are?
Yep. Hello, everyone. I'm Jack Russell. I am the sales and marketing manager for the United States Naval Institute Press. Normally I don't do too much, camera-facing stuff for USNI, but you might have seen us before. You and I did an episode of the Portholes podcast together, which Ryan Zizmansky and I typically do, and I've done interviews with USNI authors on my personal channel, which is Bearing Straight.
We'll have a link for that in the video description below. And of course, I think we've also done some World of Warship streams as well, haven't we?
Yes, yes. You and I have participated in World of Warships live streams together. We've done a couple over the years. I think the last one was last May.
Yeah, I think that was the 150 years of USNI commemorative one.
Oh yeah, I forgot about that one. That was in the fall. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that was good fun.
So, having looked at the grounds, the library, the archives, etc. So, for everyone to understand, you've got US Navy Institute as a whole, and then you have USNI Press, which is part of it. So, what's the well, I'm not going to say the distinction because obviously it's all part of the same organisation, but what does the USNI do that is beyond what USNI Press does?
Okay, so USNI as a whole, we've been around since 1873. So 1873 is plastered everywhere all over this building. And so initially it was the organization that launched Proceedings. So obviously the naval officers got together. Then they held these meetings and they wanted to record their thoughts and their ideas on how the Navy could be better. This was in the immediate sort of post-U.S. Civil War period. And so initially that's what the U.S. Naval Institute was. It was not, even though it was U.S. naval officers and it was held here at the Naval Academy, technically, it's not a U.S. Navy sponsored organization. We're not federal government. I'm not a DoD employee. I'm a civilian who works for technically a nonprofit, which is what we are today. Now, over the years, things have been added to that. So, obviously, Naval History magazine, then eventually the as you mentioned, the Naval Institute Press came about, which then we started publishing books. And then really, by the time the 90s roll around, that's when we're kind of on our way to becoming the media company that we kind of bill ourselves as these days. So today that's Proceedings, Naval History magazine, the website, the archive, the press, USNI News. So there's quite a lot going on, and we like to be at sort of the forefront of everything sort of Navy. But again, because we're not a part of the Navy, we can do things outside of their control, which we can criticize the Navy. If Proceedings publishes an article that says, we don't like the way you're doing this particular job, that's it. We can say that. And naval officers and everyone else read that and can really start to think, and that's sort of how you build the dialogue that Proceedings has always sort of been since, like I said, 1874.
Yeah. And that's actually a really important part of it, because as if there are internal publications in every Navy, but there's obviously a hierarchical structure to navies. There's things you can and can't say, both for, but obviously there's classification stuff which people won't say in any form outside of the appropriate areas. But there's also, if you're working, as you said, for, I don't know, let's say 7th Fleet, and you have a poor opinion of something that's going on in 7th Fleet, internally there's a certain way of raising those concerns, but you can't just tell everyone that this is a problem. Whereas by being external to that, it allows that kind of that rank structure to disappear. So if an admiral, let's say, has severe concerns with the way the Navy strategy is going, internally everyone has to be marching in the same direction. But it gives through Proceedings, he's got an opportunity to say, I don't actually think this is a good idea, guys. But likewise, someone who's a lieutenant or a commander, if they've got a problem and they want to say, I don't think this is working, they can do that via Proceedings, and then senior officers can see that and go, oh, maybe we do need to change this. And it's a very important thing across all navies to be able to have that sort of check and balance and control, because otherwise, we've seen through history the number of navies that, especially in peacetime, will get an ossified chain of command.
Yeah.
And then suddenly a war comes along and it's like, yeah, maybe this didn't work. So for example, if you think about in World War One, we have that big tragedy in the Royal Navy of Aboukir, Hogue, and Cressy all being sunk one by a U-boat. And a lot of people today will go, why would you put 3 obsolete armoured cruisers down in the southern part of the North Sea? It's a dumb thing to do. And part of it was honestly just because there was that ossification of the Royal Navy chain of command. And when people, even before the sinking, asked, why have you put 3 armoured cruisers down there on this patrol route? The answer was, we've always had a patrol squadron there, except that justification went back to the last time the Royal Navy had a war situation in the North Sea, which was in 1815, in the age of sail, when there wasn't such a thing as a U-boat. Right. And, you could have a squadron of frigates patrolling there, and if France sent out a squadron of battleships, you're like, oh, that's cool, we'll just go this way, and we'd be fine. And no one had stopped to think, well, U-boats can just pop out of harbour and take them all out, which is exactly what happened. Whereas, at risk of sounding a little bit pedantic, something like a Royal Navy version of Proceedings, where maybe in 1912 someone could have gone, I'm not necessarily sure we should just resurrect the old Napoleonic patrol routes in a modern environment, would have been a good idea.
And you mentioned that time period, because if you look at some of the most famous U.S. admirals from the World War II, they all have articles published in Proceedings, 10, 20, 30 years before World War II, when they're all junior, grade, when they're going through the academy, and they're asking those questions, and they're seeing how, the Navy today is operating like the Navy 20 years ago, but that's like the 1890s Navy. And so how are we changing as the world is changing? And so it's not surprising when you see, King and Lee and Nimitz and all of them and their initial writings, and you see like their photographs. You're like, wow, that's pretty incredible to think that in a couple decades you all will lead the largest Navy in world history through World War II.
Yeah, and it's also fascinating to see some of those officers' specialities developing through the interwar period, especially because if you happen to be a member of USNI, you can access the archives of proceedings.
Yes, if you are a member of the Naval Institute, you can access every single issue of proceedings going back all the way to Volume 1 back in 1874.
Cool.
And not only do we have a copy of every single one here on site, but they're all available digitally through the website.
So, for example, we've got a small sample of what USNI publishes, and some of you might recognize Paul Stilwell's excellent Battleship Commander, all about Admiral Lee, sitting up there. And, if you become a member of USNI, look through those proceedings archives, look through the 1930s, and you'll discover a certain, I think at that point he's Captain Lee, publishing a fairly extensive monograph in proceedings that is all about how to shoot battleship guns accurately.
Go figure. I wonder what he ends up doing.
Yeah. So, shockingly, this was not his first rodeo when he opens fire on Hiroshima.
Right.
And it's interesting on multiple levels from a historical perspective, because you're looking at it, as I say, saying, look, this is how they're proceeding through their careers, this is where their tactics and strategies coming from, but it also shows you how far back some of these things are being thought about and discussed. And flipping it on the other side, when you look at some of the things that maybe didn't go quite so well, like the first few night actions at Guadalcanal, it's not a monolithic, everyone's diving into this going, no, we'll be fine, why are we all on fire? There are publications in proceedings in the 1930s where some officers are going, maybe we should look at this. Which shows, it shows the value of proceedings as a journal, both then historically and also, looking at the way things are going nowadays.
Yeah, absolutely. And, still to this day, proceedings every single month, you get a new issue. And they still are, we still have plenty of midshipmen and captains and officers of all ranks who submit articles challenging the practices and the beliefs of the Navy. And so who knows, in some future hypothetical war with a future hypothetical Asian power, Admiral such and such might lead some fleet to some great grand victory that rivals Jutland or something, and they'll be like, oh, when you were a lieutenant, you wrote this in proceedings in 2018 or something, so who knows what the future holds.
Yeah, exactly. And then, of course, as I said, you've got Naval History magazine, which is kind of looking back at, and again, if you're a member of USNI, you can choose to subscribe to Naval History magazine.
Yes, so up until recently, actually, when you became a member of USNI, you had to go through proceedings, and now you can actually get your membership through Naval History magazine as well. So before you had to choose, before you could go proceedings and add Naval History, but now you can start with Naval History. So if maybe the contemporary, if you're not a fan of maybe U.S. Navy fleet problems and tactics, you can just go straight for the Naval History if that's more your speed, hence your channel and everything else. So,
and again, it's not just a case of without trying to disparage any specific publication, it's not just a retelling of stuff that has occurred in the past. These are articles which people have gone and done a lot of research in. They've accessed the USNI archives, they've accessed the US Navy archives just across the way. They've obviously been to NARA and places like that, and they've dug up an awful lot of interesting information, which a lot of the time is either bringing something that a few people knew, but is now bringing this to a much larger audience, or it's actually in completely new stuff that people haven't considered before, either whether it's a new perspective on a battle, a war campaign, a ship or whatever, or a specific detail that hasn't been realized before. And one interesting thing, which I think by the time this goes up, you'll probably have already seen coming up in a video on USS Monitor, which is in the April 2024 edition. So being here, I was able to read it, even though we're recording this in February. But we've all seen the Battle of Hampton Roads, and this is actually one of the things I really like about this kind of publication is we've all seen the Battle of Hampton Roads. Everyone knows what that engagement looks like, don't we? Or do we? Because it turns out that everyone knows what USS Monitor looks like, raft with a biscuit tin stuck on top with some guns poking out.
But with a turret that doesn't work.
Yeah,
after a while.
But with this article, what the particular author in question has pointed out is that according to all the Navy records and some photographs, when she went into battle, Monitor's turret actually had armored faceplate around the guns to add additional protection to, in the direction that it was being fired at, which makes a perfect sense. The reason why we don't really see that depicted is because you have a combination of factors. There's the original plans, but the plans for Monitor were changing on an almost daily basis while she was under construction. And then you have, after the Battle of Hampton Roads, all these depictions in the short period of time when people go and see her before she sunk in the storm. But the gun turret faceplate was removed very shortly after the Battle of Hampton Roads. So at the time that she achieves her fame, at the time people are going around to take photographs and take reference drawings and so forth, at that point her turret's perfectly cylindrical. So that's what gets portrayed, and that's what enters the common lexicon. But strictly speaking, that's not what she probably looked like at Hampton Roads. But that's what you're going to find if you have Naval History magazine at your fingertips.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, these are new information is being found all the time, and so even you take something as seemingly well known as that battle, and you're just adding more information to that story. And potentially you might even you might feature
upcoming.
Upcoming maybe in the future you'll have something. Just as an example, my first article in Naval History magazine was we had the plans of a set of original plans of the Gibbs and Cox Project 1058.1, which is the hybrid carrier battleship, the really big one that was designed for the Soviet Union in the late 30s. Apparently, there's still a version. There's an original set of plans that the Russians still have today in their archives because they purchased those. Yeah. And then apparently we thought that those plans were lost by Gibbs and Cox here, but we actually, a donor, an anonymous donor, actually had them, and so there's a full-length drawing the size of our boardroom table of this upstairs, and so that's stuff that we get all the time, and so just randomly every day, every week, something like that might be unearthed, and all of a sudden here's this new information that people have just never seen before.
And then obviously, as you mentioned, we've got USNI Press, which is the book publishing media section. And obviously, the USNI Press is seen by many as one of the gold standards of naval publishing. So if you can persuade USNI Press to publish your book, it means it's actually a pretty decent book because it's got to be peer reviewed, it's got to be checked, it's got to be evaluated multiple times to make sure that one, it's new information, it's something that it's not just a rehash of somebody else's work, and it's actually accurate.
Standards. So standards are pretty high here, and we do like to keep. Obviously, we have a schedule. We have new books coming out all the time, but like you said, we don't rush publications. We go through multiple peer review process. Like Vince O'Hara, who you're familiar with and who people are channels familiar with. He's probably one of our best authors in terms of getting information, new information, getting it right, writing really well, and so he's a fantastic example. And of course, everyone, you might be familiar with like Norman Friedman and like the original like U.S. Like warship illustrated design series, like U.S. battleships, cruisers, aircraft carriers, the lot. Those have been wonderful over the years. But then, of course, a lot of people know us because we published Clancy's first book, Tom Clancy's Hunt for Red October, which is over right there. So we gave him his first shot. We get a lot of novel submissions every year because people go, well, you published Clancy, like you'll publish my book on vampires, Sorry. Doesn't work that way. Unfortunately, yeah, we don't do too many novels. But yeah, obviously Hunt for October is a big one.
And a lot of the time, some of these bigger reference works, they either become the gold standard for their particular field, or they're just, they're top of the range stuff, or they're stuff that even hasn't really had a huge amount published about them before. For those of you who like Battleship Bismarck, obviously you've got the Dulin, Garsky, and Duran's co-authored Battleship Bismarck book published by USNI Press relatively recently.
Yeah, it was in 2019 that book came out.
And then you've got, possibly released by the time this video comes out, there's a whole new book on Japanese submarines of World War II and their operations. Again, this is a subject that there are books written, but if you want a comprehensive picture, you usually end up having to go through several different books. And this one is, based on the author, based on the page count, etc. It's looking like it's going to be a pretty much comprehensive go-to source.
Right.
And then, of course, you've got all these ones we can see behind us, from autobiographies to stuff that the U.S. Navy Academy itself uses,
like Blue Jackets Manual.
Yeah.
So we're on like the 26th edition of that. Every new cadet that shows up at the Naval Academy gets a copy of Blue Jackets Manual. And that's everything from how to tie your shoes to like knots and flags and everything else. Obviously, that has changed over like 100+ years of being in production. There's some things that have been removed and there's some things that have been added because modern times things change. Like cell phone etiquette and things like that. You exactly how not to have collisions at sea. You got to pay attention. And then we did a graphic novel, Horn Fisher's. We did the graphic novel version of Horn Fisher's Last Stand of the Tin Can Sailors. I can get you some images if you want to do an insert on that. And we worked with Horn Fisher, and that was actually the last thing he signed off on, unfortunately, before he passed away. But he did get to see the proof of that before it was published, and things like that.
Yeah, and then of course you've got these ones all sitting here. How many photos are there of Japanese warships compared to British, American, French? Not that many, because, well, I think for some Japanese warships, the greatest number of extant photos of them are blurry gun camera photos as a US aircraft is in the process of demolishing it.
Or like a reconnaissance flyover before the the attack planes show up.
And the few that survive that are decent quality, like clear photos from what Japanese archives did survive World War II. A lot of the time, like Kure Maritime Museum has republished them, but they've obviously worked with USNI Press to bring that to...
Yeah, so these books were originally produced by the Maritime Museum in Japanese, and we have the English rights to them. So they were translated and produced in an English language format, and we're the publisher of rights for that one. So those are fantastic if you're interested in Japanese warships.
Yeah, and there's a lot of photos in there that you won't typically find anywhere online.
No, I've Googled Yamato plenty of times, and there are photos printed in that book that I have yet to see online anywhere.
And then, of course, we have the fact, so this is everything that USNI and USNI Press has done in the past, but then going forward into the future, there's more stuff coming. It isn't just a kind of, same day, same schedule forever and ever and ever. So there's a few different things in the long-term future for USNI Press. Obviously, if you want to become a member, you get access to a lot of stuff like we've mentioned,
Yeah, your membership, you do get a book discount. So members receive 40% off new sort of front list titles. And then if the book's old and it has aged out a little bit, sometimes that drops down to 20. But yeah, generally the book discount is a large reason why people ultimately join.
And there's some special editions and packs as well that you can get sometimes?
Yes, so every once, sometimes if we have a special version of a product, a book, or like a bundle or something like that, we'll do a USNI member specific sale where it's only available if you're a member through our website. Like it won't be on Amazon or anything else like that. You know.
And as we mentioned, you can get access to proceedings and the archives and so on and so forth.
We've over 500,000 digitized photos, and not just stuff like that we've used from NARA, but like actual collections that people have donated. Again, things that you won't see in the National Archives, but if you're a member, you get access to that through the website. Then you can also, if you're in the greater Annapolis area, you could also make an appointment and come in and see stuff in person.
Yeah, and obviously everyone who is a member, you're paying your membership dues, you're helping sustain what's going on here.
We're, in this particular case, we are a nonprofit. We, by selling books, that is where a large part of the revenue of this organization comes from. But then we also take in a lot of money through donations, and it's really through the support of those donors, people who buy books, subscribe to the magazines, our members, that we can really continue on and do this work.
And hopefully we can talk about this. So in maybe the next few years, there's also a project for, I wouldn't necessarily call it an ebook, but kind of like an enhanced digital offering.
Yeah, so right now we're working on a completely new format of ebook. So instead of just, a digital version of a book that you're used to, like on your iPad or your Kindle or online, we're doing dynamic sort of interactive ebooks where a map will enlarge on your screen and you'll see the movements of ships and aircraft and how they work together, and sort of being able to embed digital content directly into the text that maybe you wouldn't be able to do in a traditional ebook that you're just reading, like I said, off of your iPad or in PDF form or something like that.
Yeah, and this is going to help hugely in understanding what's going on in a lot of cases, because as some of you will know from early videos that I've done where I put up the battle charts for a specific engagement, with the greatest will in the world, unless you're a specialist in reading the charts and unless you have the chart in their original like A0 format, understanding a map of this is what happened in the battle, it looks like you've given a spider LSD and stuck it in an inkwell and dropped it on the page and see what happens.
Right.
Whereas with an interactive map, instead of going, well, there's this spiraling loop and there's that spiraling loop, and at some point they crossed over.
You can watch as they come together.
Yeah, exactly, and that can help hugely in understanding things, because even, for example, with the video that at the time that this is being recorded has literally just been released on the Constitution versus Java. If you look at that, it's a very spiraling, messy, close-range engagement, but a couple of times the course tracks cross. But if you're just looking at that map, it's difficult to tell, did one ship cross the other in a raking position, and if it did, was it a fore position, an aft position, or was it the other way around? And the only way for you to tell is to have that map and then have a good description like Roosevelt's War of 1812, and go through and go, okay, well, at such and such time, he says this happened, and so it's that. Right. Whereas with the digital version, you can just go, play, that's what happened.
Exactly. And you can do that for, as long as you have the correct information, and you can do that for any real battle. So, anything in the Pacific, obviously, Jutland, and so we're very, very excited to be developing this. We're developing it with West Point, and it's going to be new products using this software are going to start to become available in the next sort of 2-year time frame. So,
and further on to that, you're going to be looking at things like ship models as well, because you can have the best diagrams. Some of the USNI books, like the Norman Friedman ones there, you can have really detailed schematics, maybe a three-point orthographic, which is the gold standard usually for depictions of vessels. But ultimately, that only shows you those 3 points of view. So if you want to know what the broadside of a ship looks like, great. If you want to know what it looks like coming head on, great. If you want to know what it's looked like if you're a dive bomber, fantastic. But if you're perhaps trying to understand a bit of a historical narrative where, let's say, a torpedo bomber is coming in on the starboard quarter, so essentially about roughly a 45-degree arc off of the bow, you might be wondering, well, how many anti-aircraft guns could the ship bring to bear? Well, a 3D or a 3-point ortho view won't tell you that unless you start getting out protractors and rulers and so on and so forth. Or, if there's a pursuit going, how many of this ship's main guns can fire at that ship and vice versa. Whereas with a manipulatable 3D model, you can, okay, well, if the point of view is 30 degrees off the starboard bow, rotate, now I can see directly how many guns are to bear, or what does the ship look like when it's at this position versus this position? Because sometimes you read in narrative accounts of battles that such and such a ship came over the horizon, we looked through our binoculars, we thought it might be this, it turned out to be this other ship, and it was all a bit of a disaster because it opened fire on us before we realized it was hostile. And you sit there, look at the side views. Well, they're very clearly very different ships. But you go into it and go, well,
from this angle, yeah.
No, actually, it's very difficult.
I mean, Bismarck and Prince Eugen look pretty identical from range, even based on their profiles. Imagine anything else. So exactly.
So this is, I think, going to be a really exciting thing to look through, and even for stuff like pictures, because obviously you've got even in a paper format, the picture can only be of a certain size.
You're limited to that physical size of the book. Yeah.
Whereas once it's interactive, it can be like, well, yes, it's here as a postcard-sized picture if you're just reading the text. Yeah. But if you want to see the picture, suddenly it's now full res.
Yeah, I mean, put that on my big screen TV.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah, and part of it is also adapting to modern technology, modern circumstances, because some of the big reference tomes that I'm sure some of you out there and certainly ourselves like to look at, you have these wonderful fold-out plans that you might have your Norman Friedman A4 size.
It's extremely expensive. Yeah. So one of the things that we have to deal with is a lot of people don't realize, but we get this a lot. Like, why don't books have massive fold-out plans? Well, even in this era where you think with automation and everything else, a printer should be able to do that. But unfortunately, when a book is printed, if you've ever seen it, as all these sheets are coming off the line, like sort of all together and still folded at the spine, and then they cut the ends off, that gets you the pages. Well, in order to put in a full pull-out plan, the actual printing process has to be stopped, and those plans have to be manually glued in. Yeah. And that's a lot of labor. That's labor intensive. And unfortunately, even though we try to produce everything, every book that we print, we attempt to get it done here in the United States. But like for instance, the new Garsky and Doolin Allied and Axis books, which will have the fold-out plans. We were working with a printer in South Korea this time around because there was no printer in the United States that really wanted to even do that job.
Yeah,
and it's ridiculous when you think about that, but it's the truth.
Yeah. So if you want to have full-size ship plans, this project will be the kind of thing that will allow you to have that delivered full scale.
In the future, you wouldn't even have to worry about that. If it was a digital-only product, you could have the plans as big as whatever monitor or device you were looking on.
Yeah, and so that's important especially for ships, because again, with the best will in the world, if you're doing tanks or even aircraft. Tanks especially tend to be fairly blocky, not quite square, but almost. And even aircraft, once you take into account wingspan as well as length, the overall dimension can be relatively speaking square-ish. Yeah. So you can get a decent plan view on a page, but with a ship is always, unless they're going way back to the Columbus's ships, a ship is always going to be 6, 7, 8 times longer than it is wide, which means if you've got if you either will fit, maybe height-wise on a book, you get an okay-ish lengthwise plan, but on the same scale, then the front view is like 2 inches tall, and the side view is 4 inches high. Or you have a good scale for the full length, except now you're 4 foot long and you have to go through this process.
Right, absolutely. And that's, I wish the drawings, like in U.S. battleships, are so good that I wish they could be bigger. But yeah, so that's why we had to keep the full-size gatefolds for the Allied and Axis battleships.
So we looked at past, present, future, what's coming up for USNI Press. So thanks very much for all this information. And we've mentioned a few times, if you want to become a member, you can do. Where is the best place for people to go and do that?
So I'll give you the link, but it's just usni.org. And there's a big join button that you can press, and it'll give you all the different options. You and I have worked together for a number of years now. You have your own coupon code. So if you use code DRAC in all caps, you get 25% off on checkout on books. But yes, if you would consider, typically like your membership purchase, like even the base cheapest membership, like $30, $40, depending on what book you buy, the discount pays for your membership. And then you're so then you immediately break even, and then you're off to the races from there. So, consider either renewing or joining up. That'd be wonderful.
And if you go for the full lifetime membership, you get a snazzy.
You get a
Sweatshirt.
snazzy jumper and a nice signed letter from the CEO,
And it's really comfy and warm as well. All right, thanks very much. And
Well, over to the archives and library. So this is where you'll end up if you make an appointment to do some research at USNI's archive-library. This is the initial part of it, so you can see you've got some reading desks there and the first of many, many, many very solid bookshelves, which make me very, very envious, although it was quite gratifying going through and looking at the various titles and going, oh, got that one, haven't got that one, but I probably can acquire it. Got that one, got that one, got that one, got that one. And then, of course, you come across the ones where there's basically no chance of you ever coming across one outside of this library or one like it, but that's why these things exist, for you to go and do research in publications that you couldn't necessarily otherwise get your hands on. Such as this section, where you can see many, many, many periodicals, both in individual and bound volume format. This is obviously more of the archive section of the library, but as we pan around, as well as the shelves of periodicals, you'll notice there is a computer terminal, so you can do research online or within digitized portions of the archive. And then over here, you've got stands for mounting cameras and so forth. So if you need to scan documents, you can do that. You can see there's a cart of stuff that's been recently used. And, just casual boxes of reference photos, like if you've got the Naval Weapons book by Norman Friedman. Well, this wasn't set up. This was literally just on a side table. Here's a box of photos, which are a whole bunch of reference photos used in said Naval Weapons and Firepower book by Norman Friedman. They're just there. If you want to have a look at the originals or take copies of them, there they are, and there's plenty more like them. Just be aware that for the serious researcher, Gollumization is a risk. So that's a brief look at the history of the US Navy Institute and the US Navy Institute Press and what they're doing at the moment. But if you don't happen to be in the States, or you just aren't on the Central East Coast, and therefore a trip to Annapolis is not necessarily the easiest thing on the to-do list, well, there are other options, of course. They have a very wide range of high-quality naval history books for sale. As Jack mentioned, if you are a member, you get a discount. Also, if you look in the video description of pretty much every video I've published for several years now, you'll find a code DRAC, which will entitle you to a discount even if you're not a member, so you can get books that way. For example, one of the members of the Dry Dock Discord server that I run happened to mention he is publishing a book with USNI soon. As you can see, this is all about one of the fighter squadrons aboard USS Intrepid in the Second World War, so that will be published, release date there, January the 14th, 2025, so not too long now, but you can pre-order it already. And speaking of pre-ordering, or just ordering, if you want to do that, you can see at the moment, as of the time this video goes live, and until the end of the year, there is the holiday catalogue sale. So there's another discount as well. There you go, 50% off. which is quite handy. And if you use your member discount, the holiday discount, or the direct discount, it will apply whichever one of those discounts is the greatest, so you get to save the most amount of money. And if your budget doesn't necessarily quite stretch to a complete set of Norman Friedman's US battleship, cruiser, destroyer, etc. development books, which is understandable, then may I interest you in the Naval History Special Editions. They are considerably easier on the wallet and still have an extremely high degree of scholarship. You can see their various authors have appeared on the channel before. Vince O'Hara has written quite a few. Down there at the bottom, Trent Hone has written one. And oh wait, what's this one on the top left corner? Yes, it's the latest one. It's all about HMS Belfast, and it's written by someone who I happen to know very well, mostly on the grounds that he is me. Yes, ladies and gentlemen, I have in fact gotten my first book published, and it is being published by USNI. As you can see here, it is part of the Spring 2025 catalogue. It's due for release in April 2025, but you can pre-order it with any of the aforementioned discount codes, so you might want to get it in now. And for those of you who are interested, yes, there will be some author-signed copies, and hopefully it will also be available at some point next year in that new exciting enhanced ebook format that we were discussing with Jack earlier in the video. So for those of you who are wondering, when is Jack ever going to write a book? I did, and hopefully it will be the first of many. More news about the release and what we might be doing surrounding the release coming soon to a YouTube channel near you. So with many thanks to the US Navy Institute for having me over as a guest, letting me have access to their facilities, talking to their staff, and of course, as you've seen, hosting one of their discussion panels, it's time to wrap up this video. Obviously, as I said, please do go and check out the various books on offer from US Naval Institute Press. Pick up a few for friends, family, yourself, who knows, and maybe if you feel like it, give my one a read as well. I'd really appreciate it. Anyway, thanks very much, and see you again in another video.
That's it for this video. Thanks for watching. If you have a comment or suggestion for a ship to review, let us know in the comments below. Don't forget to comment on the pinned post for dry dock questions.